Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to continue in our series on the covenants that we started last week as we explored God's faithfulness to creation, in creation. And if you were here last week, hopefully you remember that saying, God is faithful from the beginning because he made his promise in the beginning. And we're going to see God's continued faithfulness in the time of Noah. And it's election time. And this quote from Peter Gentry in his book, Kingdom and Through Covenant, which is where I'm kind of tracing these covenants and these themes. And he started off the chapter on Noah with this observation. He's Canadian, I believe, and so he's coming from a Canadian perspective. And the Toronto Star, a major newspaper in the largest city in Canada, this newspaper published an article in November of 1996 announcing that Mr. Jean Chrétien, I'm not French, I have no idea how to say that, the Prime Minister of Canada at that time had completely fulfilled 78 of his election promises. That sounds like a pretty high number for someone in politics, right? 78%. And it got me thinking when I saw that, well, what about our recent presidents? And I was searching online, and I happened to find the Poynter Institute's PolitiFact webpage. And for President Biden, he so far has kept 28% of his campaign promises. 10% he had to compromise and work with the other legislatures and lawmakers. 3% broken, but then there's quite a bit that we have yet to be determined. When we go back to Trump, 23% of his promises were kept, 53% of his promises were broken, and 22% needed some kind of compromise. Going back to Obama, 47% of his promises were kept. He compromised another 27 and broke just 23% of his promises. Now, this is important for today because we want to look at God's promises and how God is faithful. And we're coming into a political season, and you're going to hear politicians say all the things that they want to do. And growing up and learning about how the lawmaking system in America works, I always scratch my head on that, going, how can they make promises when, one, they don't have all the information yet? You don't get that till you're in office. Two, circumstances can change between now and 12 months from now by the time you actually get to work in office. And 2020 was a huge example of that, right? Trump made all these promises and then COVID hit, and basically we just have to about face on everything. We have to put everything on the back burner and just focus on the issue at hand. And that happens sometimes. Something more important comes up and we say, I'm sorry, I really wanted to do this, but we can't right now because we have to do this. But let's say everything goes according to plan. You still have 435 members of the House of Representatives that have to be on board with you, or at least a majority, to pass your law. Then it goes to the Senate where you have to convince another 50 people, or at least a majority of them, before your promise can even be fulfilled. And so fulfilling these promises, at least politically speaking, is really complicated, complex, and difficult. And then you add all the multiple layers of government and the fact that every elected official has made their promises, and sometimes promise A from candidate A conflicts with promise B from candidate B, and that's why we see sometimes they have to compromise. Sometimes to fulfill one promise, another promise has to be broken. Politics is really messy. And the beautiful thing with God is this. Peter Gentry continues, says, by contrast, the God revealing himself in a progression of covenants, or his promises, has completely fulfilled his promises to Noah and to the entire human race as entailed in the covenant with Noah. Look at this promise rate. 100% of God's promises for several thousand years, God has fulfilled. And the proof is in the alternating progression of seasons experienced up to the present time. So every day we see the sun come up, we see the sun go down, we see the moon come out and the stars come out. We see God's faithfulness. He is again fulfilling his promise. Every month we watch the phases of the moon. They go from waxing to waning. They go from from crescent to gibbous back to crescent. We see God's faithfulness every month. God is faithful 100%. The moon has never skipped a phase. Look at our seasons. Spring, summer, fall, winter. Spring, summer, fall, winter. Spring, summer, fall, winter. God has never once skipped a season. Ask the farmers in the area, has God ever skipped a time of planting or a time of harvest? Never once. God has been faithful throughout. Yes, sometimes crops are better and sometimes crops dip, but the seasons are faithful because God is faithful. And as we covered last week, God's promise is his commitment to sustaining and upholding creation and partnering with humans and ruling over it. And he's been faithful since the beginning because he made that promise in the beginning. And this week we're going to see how God chooses to uphold and strengthen this promise through Noah. And he does it because when he says he'll do something, he does do it. And so if you will, read with me. We're going to read a little bit in Genesis chapter 6, and then we're going to jump ahead to the end of Noah's story and read in Genesis chapter 9. So here's Genesis chapter 6, starting in verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man from whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Jump down to verse 18. God is speaking to Noah, and he has declared what he will do, and he has told Noah to build the ark. And God says, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. And if we jump ahead to chapter 9, verse 8, this is after they have disembarked from the ark. The waters have receded, new vegetation has come up from the ground. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as came out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. Underline that, all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. Father, as we look at this everlasting covenant, and we are reminded that you do what you say you will do, Father, we ask that you would spur our hearts to even greater faith, to even greater understanding, and to even more ongoing action as we trust you in all that you say you will do. We bless you, Jesus. Amen. So when God says something, when he says he'll do something, he does it. And we saw that in creation. He spoke, and whatever God spoke came about. And God spoke at the end of creation that humans would rule as his image bearers and according to his likeness. and that he would provide for them and sustain this wonderful creation so that we can experience the life that he intended for us. But when we get to Genesis chapter 6, things have changed a little bit, haven't they? The sunrise isn't quite so shiny, and all of a sudden things are a bit darker in the world. But before we do this, I want to show a quick video, just kind of summarizing covenants as a whole. And this is again from the Bible Project. So when we go back to Genesis chapter 6, we need to ask the question, how do we get to that spot? We started in our reading where it said, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. If you look down at verse 11, we see, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, and all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. How do we get to this point? And when we look at the literary function of Genesis 3 through 11, we can really kind of label it the genealogy of sin. How the transgression of Adam and Eve, their rebellion against God, their choosing to define what is good and what is not good according to their own wisdom, gets perpetrated in every successive generation. And so Adam and Eve eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They rebel against God, and they redefine God's creation. They wanted to call the shots instead of God. And then we see Cain and Abel in Genesis chapter 4 doing the same thing. Here, it's Cain's desire for divine favor, which should be good. We should want to be in God's good graces, right? We should want to be in relationship with God. And yet Cain said, instead of doing what God said, Genesis 4:7, God tells Cain, if you do well, won't it be good for you? You will have that relationship that you want if you do well. But in Genesis 4:8, this is how Cain interprets if you do well. They went out to the field, Cain rose up against his brother and killed him. It's reversing the thing that God had said. And when you follow Cain's genealogy, you get to the 7th generation, and 7 is the number of fulfillment, that number of completion. And so we can imagine this from a literary perspective as the biblical author saying, the sin that we see in Adam and Eve, the sin that we see in Cain, gets its fulfillment in Lamech, where now it's not even in seeking God. Now it's humanity basically telling God to shove it. And so we get Lamech in Genesis chapter 4. He's the first polygamist, so he's just taking wives. He's not honoring the marriage covenant. And then he boasts to his wives in 4:23 and 24. Lamech says to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I have to say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. What he's basically doing is saying, that twerp over there offended me. He bumped me in the restaurant, spilled his Coke all over my shirt, it's all stained, so I killed him. Not only that is there a great injustice there, but then notice what he says in verse 24. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, because God told Cain if anybody were to harm him, then vengeance shall be taken on him 7-fold. God will uphold justice for Cain, even when Cain did not uphold justice for Abel. God is faithful. What Lamech is doing is he's putting himself in the place of God and saying, I'm going to establish justice my way. If God is going to stand for Cain in bringing 7-fold judgment, if anybody were to harm him, well, I'm even greater than God. And if anybody offends me, then their punishment will be 77-fold, 7 times 7 worse than what happened to Cain. And so we have Lamech really kind of picturing the audacity and the boldness of human rebellion. And this leads into Genesis chapter 6, where we have this weird section in the first few verses about the sons of God and the daughters of men. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the conclusion of that comes in Genesis 6:5 and 6:11 that we had just alluded to, where the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Verse 11, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. It's a situation where you kind of have this mental picture of you open the door and you look out in your front yard and you just see chaos. And you're like, nope, not today. And you step back in and shut the door. That's what you want to do in this situation. And these words, wickedness, corruption, and violence, they're important. Wickedness is the Hebrew word ra, and it was first introduced in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of the knowledge of Tov and Ra are the two Hebrew words. And Ra is the opposite of the things that God had created and called good. It is the opposite of God's purpose. It is the opposite of God's plans. It is evil. And it is in the core of the human heart. And the human heart, if you remember, is the center of our very being. And so now human identity is no longer very good, what God declared in creation, but it is now very raw. It is very evil. Everything that we feel, all our emotions and our feelings are filtered through this evil condition. Our ability to think, our reason, the way we process the information of the world and make decisions is filtered through raw. It is evil. All of our plans and things that we want to do. Cain had to plan Abel's death. He had to sit there and think, where can I get Abel away from help and support, where nobody will hear and nobody will know? Let's bring him out to the field. It was premeditated. Corruption shows that a beautiful and good situation is now ruined. You've heard the saying, oh, it's the fly in the ointment. You have this beautiful ointment, it's fragrant, it should be a wonderful perfume, or for those of you into essential oils, the healer of all things. And all of a sudden a fly gets in there and it messes everything up. It creates stink, it creates rancidness. It ruins the entire pot, one little fly. Everything has been ruined and it can no longer function as it is intended. If you've had oil that's gone rank, you can tell it smells bad. It doesn't heat right when you try to cook with it. You can't use it as a balm on anything. You have to throw it out. The whole bottle is corrupted. It cannot function the way it was intended. And because of sin in the world, now the whole world is corrupted and it cannot function as it was intended. It cannot be good because humans have allowed it to become evil. And violence went through all the earth. This word violence in the Hebrew specifically relates to social violence, how humans treat humans and how humans treat their creation. And so thinking about human society, in the last few years, we've had a number of challenges that have come up that have brought to light the social injustices in our political systems, in our governing systems, and just the way that our culture is structured. And we saw it in Lamech's murder. Somebody offended him, and Lamech killed him. The death penalty for stepping on somebody's foot is unjust, right? That doesn't make sense. That's what was happening in the ancient world. This is where I want to go back to Genesis 6:2, because this passage on the sons of God and the daughters of men, it is really difficult. And scholars have debated for centuries on how exactly to understand this particular text, but there are kind of two key ways of understanding it that I think carry some weight. And the one way is through this idea of the right of the first night. Now, for those of you who've been married, think back to the first night of your marriage. You've just had the ceremony, you've gone off on your honeymoon, and you get to consummate the marriage. But in some of these ancient cultures, the rite of the first night said that the royal family, the ruling ones, the king and his sons, could actually crash your wedding, say, I'm going to take your wife, and I have the right to spend the first night with her. Once I spend the first night with her, then you can have your wife. And by the way, that's a reminder to you that I'm the Son of God, not you. Remember, this is the pagan way of thinking in the ancient Near East. And because I am the Son of God, I have the right to claim whatever I want to claim and to let go of whatever I want to let go. It was the use of illicit sexual action as a means of expressing dominance and control over others. It was done to reinforce the power and the authority of the king and of the king's sons. To say, I rule over you and I can take what I want. See what I did there? And now that family and that husband has to be submissive to the king. So there's one interpretation, and another interpretation, and this one is very difficult for us in the modern West because we've kind of come through the age of Enlightenment, we've come through materialism, the scientific method. We have to be able to observe things to know if they are true, and so this really pushes against that. But in the ancient Near East, the phrase sons of God referred to spiritual beings. And in fact, in all other Old Testament references to the phrase sons of God, it's always of a spiritual being. And so some scholars posit that Genesis chapter 6 is a second fall. It's a spiritual fall. That the sons of God, these spiritual beings, crossed their boundary of authority. They were set into the heavens to rule the times and the seasons and the days. And in ancient cosmology, if you looked up at the sky at night and you saw the stars and the moon and the sun, you would think, oh, those are spiritual beings, and God has given them authority over these certain parts of creation. God created humans to have authority over the earth. And so these scholars that look at it this way say the spiritual beings were not pleased that God gave humans a higher status in the earth than them. And they said, we're going to take rule over the earth, which again would be parallel to the ancient cultures of their day, where they did believe that these spiritual beings controlled the earth. And so they transgress authority, and then they do so by trying to create illicit sexual union with humanity to express their rule over humanity. In either way that you go, and there's evidence in the text to suggest either way. It's very, very difficult. But either way you go, you see the abuse of sex to manipulate and to control for the purpose of taking and exercising unjust power. And that was not just commonplace, but it was institutionalized. John Walton expresses the reason why this is so deprecating for a society is because when its leaders, if you relate sons of God to the kings and the royal families, then if the rulers and leaders are oppressive or corrupt, then the moral fiber of the population will begin to erode away, and it follows the example of its leaders. This phenomenon is observable at every level of behavior, whether violence breeds violence, corruption breeds corruption, racism breeds racism, sexual misconduct breeds sexual misconduct, or lies breeds lies. You can think of it as later in Scripture where God says, "But I will visit the sins and the iniquities of the children to the third and the fourth generations." It's this learned behavior that gets passed down generation to generation to generation. It's this learned behavior that begins to become normalized. In psychology, you hear this term of normalization, like what is normal? How do we get people back to a state of being normal? And last year when I was at Cornerstone, that question came up because there were some of the student workers in the library who were psychology majors, and I asked them, well, how do you guys define normality? What is the base standard that we need to go back to? And there were some different theories, and we go, but in Scripture, where do we go back to? It goes back to a pre-fall state. When God created the right side up world before sin turned it upside down, the right side up world is the standard for what is normal. And we have to go back to what is normal because otherwise nothing fits, nothing works. And so we think about this institutionalized corruption, this institutionalized oppressiveness, this institutionalized sin. We see it in all these different areas of society. Look at the field of psychology now, where they're saying, well, you can be whatever you think you are, and what is normal? What is normal is what you were born to be. And yet, when we look at the truth from Scripture, we were born into sin. We are we're sinful from our very beginning. And so we have to look before sin to see what is normal. And that's why God's promise to bring about a new creation, to recreate human beings and the world at large through Jesus Christ is so important, because he's going back to that original standard. We need that. But because our society has normalized sin, we turn on the television and we see illicit relationships, and they're presented as this is normal and should be celebrated. And we have, our culture has pride days to celebrate things that are abnormal, to say this should be normal because it's what we feel. We have situations where just look at the political candidates that we've had over the past number of election cycles. Not one of them is truly, truly, truly the type of person that we really want to have. And oftentimes when we vote, we're voting for the lesser of two evils. Or we have to try to weigh the different issues on the ballot and go, okay, these are both messed up, but I have to give greater weight to this one because it affects more people, and so I have to vote this way, knowing that there's a whole group of people over here that will be negatively affected if this person gets into office. There's no right choice. What's worse is not only was there rampant sin in the world, but nothing was being done to stop it. Using flood language, we could argue that sin had flooded the earth, and God's response then is to flood the sin. That's where we get Genesis 6 and 7. God regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. And we talked about this idea of God repenting or God grieving or God regretting when we talked about Saul and Saul becoming king. And John Walton, he analyzed all the different uses of the term, the Hebrew term translated here, grieved. And he said one of the tying themes in all these expressions was this idea of balancing the ledgers. And so if you're in accounting or you just try to balance your checkbook, you know that the money out and money in has to equal. There has to be a net zero at the bottom. Or the books are off and you need to go find the mistake or go find the person who's not using the money correctly. And when God creates the heavens and the earth, and he calls it good 7 times, and he finishes with very good, that means the balance of the world that he is committed to uphold is a good world. And when sin comes in, it begins to throw that balance off, and all of a sudden, there is not enough good to cancel out what is bad. And so there comes a point where sin is institutionalized, where corruption is normalized, where God says, okay, it is time to correct the books. We need to start to bring things back into balance and restore what was. We need to bring it back to the way that God had always intended. John Walton says, Yahweh is seeking to redress the situation. He is auditing the accounts because he has made humankind. This action of auditing the accounts is the first part of his ultimate intention to balance the ledger that has been put out of balance by the wickedness of humankind. We can say then that God is enforcing a system of checks and balances as part of the equilibrium that he is maintaining in the world. So last week, when we said God is committed to sustaining the world as he has created it, humans rebelled. Now they're changing the world into something that is different than what God intended. If God's purpose is here, humans are taking it over here, and God's saying, no, I won't let you do that. I've put guardrails up upon my creation because I am faithful to it. I am faithful from the beginning, and I will redirect it back over here so that it is good again. When God created the world, it was good and balanced. Everything worked, and it worked the right way, and it worked under his rule. When humanity rebelled, it threw creation out of balance. It doesn't work anymore because it's not under God's rule, because humans have led it under the rule of some other power. And so God has to bring it back under his rule, and that means he has to remove that middle manager. We've used this analogy before. If the middle manager is not doing his job, the boss has a responsibility to remove the middle manager and hire somebody else who will. And this decision can be painful. This decision can hurt. It can be like a parent who has a child with a severe illness, and the doctor offers two choices. The child can die, or the child can receive this very painful treatment, but he will live and after time recover and have a full life. And as a parent, you know the choice you have to make. You love your son or your daughter, and you're going to choose life for your son or your daughter, even though it will cause your son or daughter pain. You make that choice, and every time you take that son or daughter to the hospital, to the doctor, they get treatment, they have to reset, they have to go through surgery again and again, and they're going through the recovery process, and you're hearing their cries, and you're holding them in your arms, and you're going, I know, it's so painful, I get it, but I have to do this because it is for your life. God has that same emotional capacity. God has that same emotional response. He holds creation in his arms, and he says, I know this hurts. This was not what anybody wanted, but it is for your good. It is for your life. And not only that, but God, because he feels to the nth degree, he is embedded in our creation. This is God's incarnational quality. He doesn't just observe what we feel. He doesn't just emote or empathize with what we feel. He himself feels it. And so as God brings the flood on creation, and Scripture says it grieved God that he created man, it's because he felt the pain of what humanity had brought into the world. And he was going to feel the pain of what he had to do to make it right. God was experiencing that with his creation. Peter Gentry writes, the divine response refers to God's consistent opposition to injustice. He has to do something. God's consistent opposition to injustice, to social violence, and to wickedness that does not indicate that he is changeable or capricious. God is good and will always be good. God is powerful and will always be powerful. The flood then is a divine judgment in response to the evil of the human heart and the resultant corruption of violence in the world. But sometimes we ask, why all the animals? In Genesis 6:13, notice he changes humanity to all flesh. I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Them includes all flesh, which includes all animals. And so, what I think the logic of the text is, because humanity has rebelled against God and brought violence into the world, then the world, the creation, rebels against humanity, and because we follow in the way of our leaders, violence begets violence, corruption begets corruption, even the created world begins to act violently. We sometimes think, if it wasn't for, why did Noah keep the mosquito on the ark? Well, I think mosquitoes were biting Noah before the flood came. Animals were being violent before the flood came, and so God has to wash not just the world of humanity and human sin, but the effects of human sin, which is expressed in the greater world. And notice also in Genesis 9:5 that the animals themselves are held responsible if they kill a human being. So the effects of human sin reach far beyond just our own species, if you will. So the text seems to indicate that even the animals have become corrupt and evil as a result of human sin flooding the world, causing chaos everywhere. And so now God must act. God has the responsibility of caring for his creation. We covered that as we saw how Genesis 1-3 can be found, you can kind of have that covenant kind of structure to it. And that responsibility for his creation cannot be discharged by simply letting sin run amok. That would be contrary to God's nature. Because he's responsible for his creation, that implies that he must respond when something affects his creation. When God says he'll do something, he does it. When God says at creation, this is a good creation. He's going to work to maintain its goodness. When he says to humanity, I will bless you and I want you to go and be fruitful and multiply, to rule and have dominion, God is committed to that, but it needs to be done his way. When God looks at the animals and says, I have given you the plants of the earth for food, then God is faithful to that and he will restore vegetation. God brings judgment. He's taking this downward trajectory that humans have brought into the world, and he's saying, I'm going to bring it to its ultimate conclusion, but that way I'm in control. If I leave humans control, it's going to end in the worst way possible. But if I take control, then I can redirect it into something new, into something beautiful. And so God chooses to flood sin. He'll plunge his creation back into watery chaos. And at this point in the narrative, we're wondering, will God still keep his promise to creation? Will God still keep his promise? And the answer is an emphatic yes. Because God calls Noah. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. There's at least one person who has stayed faithful and in relationship with God. Now notice in verse 9, he's blameless in his generation. It doesn't mean Noah was perfect. It doesn't mean Noah's righteousness was on par with God's. But it means compared to the rest of the people in his time, Noah stood out. And God said, I can use you because you have stayed faithful. You're not perfect, and we see that at the end of chapter 9. But I can use the one who is faithful. And this idea of righteousness, it's this right relationship with God and with others. J.W. Only writes, it's to bring about right and harmony for all, for individuals related in community, and to be to the physical and spiritual realms. To bring all creation back into a right relationship with each other and with God. Because Noah's walking with God, he can be God's instrument to bring righteousness back into the earth. And this is even reflected in Noah's name in Genesis 5:29, where his dad Lamech, not the evil Lamech from Cain's line, but this is the 10th generation from Seth. Lamech called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. In Genesis 3, the ground was cursed, and it worked against humans. Now Noah, one out of the ground, is going to bring righteousness or right relationship back between humans and the earth. God is going to do something through Noah's life that will restore creation. Not only that, but Noah is presented as a new Adam. And there's a lot of parallels from Genesis 6:9 looking back onto Genesis 1-3 in creation. And so you can read these two stories right next to each other and you'll see how they overlap. Or last week I used the image of kind of that scriptural rearview mirror. As we read Noah's story, we're caused to think back to God's creation story. So in both, water covers the face of the earth. In both, God's spirit or breath is over the waters. In Genesis 8:2, God makes a wind, that's the same Hebrew word for spirit or breath, to blow over the earth. In both, dry land comes up out of the waters. In both stories, vegetation comes out of the land. In Genesis 8:11, that's where the dove comes back with a fresh olive leaf. Both animals and humans will occupy the land. In Genesis 8:16, God calls Noah and the animals to come out of the ark. The flood's done. It's safe again. God then blesses humanity and the animals to be fruitful and to multiply and to go back and to fill the earth. In Genesis 1, rule and dominion are given to humans to rule over creation. But in Genesis 9:2, God puts the fear and dread on the animals, and then he delivers them into the hands of humans. That's a modification, but it's still an example of humans having a type of dominion over the animals. But now it's going to be harder because the animals are afraid of you. Food is given in both situations. There's a restriction given on the food. In creation, it was do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For Noah coming off the ark, it was do not eat food with the blood still in it. Both affirm humanity is made in God's image. And in both stories, the human character, Noah and Adam, work the ground. In both stories, when they sin, they experience nakedness and shame follows. And then lastly, when you read closely, in creation, God speaks 10 times. And when you count the number of times God speaks in the Noah story, he speaks again 10 times. And these are all different ways that the biblical author is telling us this is a new creation. And because it's a new creation, there is hope. But the fundamental issue in humanity that stems from Genesis chapter 3 is still there in Genesis chapter 9. Gentry writes, when God says that he is confirming or upholding his covenant with Noah, he is saying that his commitment to his creation, the care of the Creator to preserve, provide for, and rule over all that he has made, including the blessings and ordinances he initiated through Adam and Eve and their family, are now to be with Noah and his descendants. That's what all these parallels point to. God's commitment to Adam and Eve in the garden is being carried forward to God's commitment to Noah and his family as they come off the ark. And so God saves. God tells Noah, build the boat, make it seaworthy, cover it with pitch. And the dimensions used in Noah's ark are still used today for ocean-going vessels because the length, the width, the height, those proportions are necessary for safe sea travel. God says, I will uphold my covenant with you. The covenant that I established in creation, I am moving it forward to you. And so come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and bring all living things with you. And see Noah's response. In Genesis 6:22 and 7:5, Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah's faithful. He obeys. He's ruling over his part of creation the way God intended. And he's on the ark, and he's on there for 150 days. And there comes a point where someone tells you something and it doesn't happen, where you start to wonder, did they forget? Yeah, at home we have kind of a tradition at bedtime where once the kids are in bed, we'll play stories for them, or we'll play audio Bible or something. And there are times where we'll get one or two of the kids in bed, and then we're working with the other two trying to get them in bed. And all of a sudden, after a few minutes, we'll hear coming from a bedroom, will you play something? Did you hear me? Did you remember? Because time has elapsed from what we said we would do to what happened. And if you're on a boat with a bunch of stinky animals and a half a year has passed, you're going to start to wonder, when can we get off this boat? I'm ready, I'm done being seasick. I want to put my feet on dry ground. God, what's happening? And in Genesis 8:1, God remembers Noah and all the beasts on the ark that were with him. And when we think of God remembering, it's not like God forgot and he's just kind of lounging on the weekend and he's just flipping through and he's like, oh, hey, deadliest catch. Oh, this is the episode on Noah. Oh, man, I forgot Noah was out in the water still. I got to go get him, right? That's not how God functions, because God doesn't forget. God is all-knowing. But when it talks about God remembering, it's a use of incarnational language, a way for us to be able to wrap our minds around what is functioning in God's thoughts or in God's ways. And so when God remembers, what it actually entails is God is putting into action the thing that he spoke before. When we remember something, oh yeah, I put the cake in the oven, I got to go pull it out, it prompts you to do something. And for God, when he remembers, the emphasis is on the doing of the thing that he said, which is why our theme for today is when God says he'll do something, he does it. God's remembering is God's doing. And so he remembers Noah. He blows across the waters recede. God brings vegetation back. The dove goes and plucks the olive leaf. And then God opens the ark and says, you can come out now. And the promise advances. God has saved. God has been faithful to what he said he would do. And in Genesis 8:21 and 22, we read that when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma of Noah's burnt offerings, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I've done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. That's where we get God's 100% promise fulfillment rate from. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. The fact that the sun rose this morning, even though it's behind clouds, God's promise did not cease. Last night, after the rain, we got home and we're putting the kids to bed and look out the window in our backyard and I see a rainbow popping up over the barn. And it's like, guys, look at this. And they all flood to the window. God's promises has not ceased. It's warm right now. In a few months, it will be cold. Wait a few months and it will be warm again. Wait a few more months and it will be cold again. God's promise has not ceased. We can trust in what God says because we can see it in his creation. He has given the world as a firm place where we can trust God to function, and we can function with God. But notice in chapter 8, verse 21, there's this phrase right in the middle, the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. What I thought the flood was supposed to correct all the evil. What's going on here? See, Noah was the same man who got on the boat as he was when he got off the boat. There's still a work that needs to be done in humanity. So even though the world is washed and God hit the reset button, Noah is still capable of rebelling against God. Noah's sons are still capable of rebelling against him. Gentry writes, the implication here is that God would be completely justified in wiping out every generation of humanity by means of the great judgment. There's only one reason why he does not do so, and it's because of his own grace and mercy toward us. It was God's grace and mercy that saved Noah and his family on the ark. And it's God's grace and mercy that says, I will establish the cosmos so that it is a stable place for humanity, and I will work out my purposes in some other way. Being given a fresh start and a clean slate is not sufficient remedy to the human plight. And we've experienced this in our lives. How many of us have said, if I can just get a fresh start somewhere, if I can just, I'm gonna get out of middle school and high school is gonna be great. Fresh start, new friends, new teachers, new schedules, it'll be awesome. And then high school is more difficult than middle school. Why? Well, there's one common denominator, and it's you. Or, man, I really don't like my job, and people are always mean to me, and this and that. I'm just going to get a new job. And you go to the next job. Man, I really don't like the people that are here. They're always mean to me. They're doing these things. And I'm just going to get a new job. And about the fourth or fifth job later, what's the common denominator? It's you, right? Or we cycle with our relationships. Oh, that person was just narcissistic and all about themselves and this and that, and then you go to the next relationship. Oh, that person was all this and this, and you get about 4 or 5 relationships later, and your family starts to scratch their head and go, you're the only one that's been the same in every relationship. That's what's happening here. A change of circumstance, a fresh start, a clean state, can't change the human heart. So for as much as it is good sometimes to get a fresh start and to remove ourselves from the influence of the world, we still have to deal with the heart. And that's why God continues to be faithful in his promises, because he has promised to change the human heart. And so he establishes his covenant, and he establishes it not just with Noah, but look at Genesis 9:9. I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you. I establish my covenant to all generations. We are benefactors of God's covenant promises to Noah. And the sign that he gave Noah was he took his bow and he hung it up. And in the Hebrew, there is no word for rainbow. The word that we see used is the general word for a weapon. So you can imagine God taking his bow and arrow. He has put his arrows in his quiver, and he has put his bow up. He has set down his weapon. And he says, I promise I won't use my weapon anymore. My grace is for you. My love is for you. My promise is for you. Instead of fighting back, I'm fighting for. He puts his bow up into the heavens. Warren Austin Gage writes, the Lord who makes his bow of wrath into a 7-colored arch of beauty to ornament the heavens is the one who will finally command the nations to beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. For the Prince of Peace takes pleasure in mercy, and the righteous judge delights in peace. Whoops, I got behind, didn't I? There we go. The righteous judge delights in grace. And when we look at the rainbow, notice the direction it's pointed. It's always pointed up. And I don't want to read too much into the text, but just that imagery of the bow pointing up. If you were to pull an arrow back and release it, what direction does it go? It goes up. And it's almost as though God is saying that the next time I have to bring catastrophic judgment to the world, I will stand in the way. I will be the one who bears the judgment. I will be the one who endures the penalty. Because of my love for creation, I will be the one who stands in the way. And I think that's why part of why the cross is so important. God comes in the person of Jesus, and he says, I bring the kingdom of heaven, but the world will reject me. And they will nail me to the cross, and I will experience the judgment. All the sin of all the world will rest on my shoulders, but I will bear it up because of my love for you. We sang about that this morning. Lead me to your cross where your love poured out. And God has said, I will take that pain and that hurt because it's in my expression of love toward you that will be the catalyst in changing the human heart. And when God says he'll do something, he does it. And so I want to encourage us today as we think about God's faithfulness, as we think about God's promises. Noah didn't deserve to be saved. He just happened to be the best of the rest. And yet God said, I'm committed to my creation. I'm committed to humanity. And I will do whatever it takes. And yeah, it's going to hurt, but I'm going to hurt right there with you. And I'm going to hold you. And I'm going to bring you new life on the other end of this. And a new creation comes. And yet, sadly, Noah plants a vineyard. He gets drunk off the produce of the vineyard. His son Ham looks upon his nakedness. There's sexual innuendo in that whole story. The human heart wasn't changed. And yet God had said before the fall, notice his promise always comes before the falling. God had said, I will never wipe out the earth again. I will be faithful, harvest and planting, cold and heat, season after season, day and night, I will be faithful. And we get to experience God's faithfulness this morning. We think back about those political campaign promises, and that 78% rate was pretty good. But God has shown that he is 100% faithful. When he says he'll do something, he does it. And every morning we see the sun rise, and every month the moon goes through its cycles and its phases. And every year we experience spring, summer, fall, and winter. Every season there's planting and there's harvest. God has demonstrated his faithfulness day in and day out. Like clockwork, God is faithful. And so if there are things that you're working through, if there are things that are broken in this world, we're coming into a political season, and it seems like some of the brokenness in our nation always gets magnified when you start hearing the politicians argue with each other and yell at each other, and then they put forth what their platforms are, and we scratch our heads and we go, that doesn't make sense. But even in the midst of all that, we go out and we see that there are storms and there are weather that's happening. We hear about the travesties and the families that are around, and we kind of go, God, what do we do? And God says, but remember, you woke up this morning. I am faithful. It was warm today because it's August. I am faithful. And it will be cold in 3 or 4 months' time because I am faithful. That's why we can celebrate winter even if we don't like winter, because God is faithful. And part of his faithfulness is he took his weapon and he said, I'm not going to aim it at humanity anymore, but instead I express my love to them by taking their pain upon myself. I am faithful. And he is so faithful that he himself came down in Jesus Christ and gave his life for us. And so there may be people in your lives who have questioned the faithfulness of God. Be encouraged as you pray for them. God is faithful, and speak that faithfulness over them, that they would experience it. There could be times and seasons in our own lives where we go, God, why is this happening to me? Are you faithful? May we remember God is faithful. God is faithful. He has not given up. The sun still rose. The end has not yet come, and there is still time. Lord, we thank you for your faithfulness. God, we thank you that you encourage us in your word, and you show us that you, above all things, are truly faithful. And Lord, may we walk in each of our days in the understanding of your faithfulness. God, that our trust and our faith is in Christ Jesus and his resurrection. And as we see every morning being born new, that we would remember that there is a day coming when all things are born new. And we get to receive the resurrection bodies that you promised and walk with you in the new heavens and the new earth. And let that drive us forward in faithfulness each and every day. Father, we love you. We bless you and we praise you. God, you are good. And because you are good, and because you are faithful, we again speak your blessing over your people. The Lord Almighty bless you and keep you. The Lord Almighty make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord Almighty lift his countenance over you and give you peace, that you may be a blessing to the families of the earth, that you would show them God is faithful, and they would experience his saving power through you across all the earth and in all nations. Let it be done in Jesus' name. Amen.